From the Sky News Centre, this is Paul Murray Live.
Daylight saving done. The footy is over. Thank you and welcome for joining us here for another week of Paul Murray Live. Special Sunday night is where we fire up each and every week. This is the start of our week. It's the hardcores. We get in before everyone else, and I'm glad that you are here in the front row. Now, there are many little theatrical moments, traditions, if you will, that we have to sit through every single year when it comes to politics. And of course, they mean nothing. Like when the finance minister and the treasurer look through the budget that they have prepared as if it's them personally running the Australian economy, and they conclude to each other on the day that the budget's about to come out, "You've done a great job." No, you've done a great job.
Big day.
Yeah.
Looking forward to releasing this.
It's a great budget, great women's budget statement. I always want to give that a plug. But months and months of work.
Yeah, a lot of collective effort in this, and I think it's going to be a really responsible budget.
Oh, what they're really doing is posing for these stills photographers, but I just play the audio because it's particularly cringe, and I love it, and we'll do it again this year. And then the other one is the string of government ministers. And again, it doesn't matter if it's Team Red or Team Blue, but the string of government ministers who, in the months before the federal budget, tell us, well, I can't rule anything in or out, or I have to wait and see until the budget a little bit later, despite the fact it's their offices that, generally speaking, float ideas to the media, particularly on a Sunday, to see whether people blow up or whether they support the ideas, and on it goes. Every year. And this in part is because the government likes to basically get away with doing nothing, making no real decisions, major announcements, and they like to build up for months and months and months and months and months to this one night on a Tuesday in and around May, and everyone sits there at 7:30. Of course, no one in the real world sits there at 7:30, but you get my point. Sits there at 7:30 and listens to a speech that only tells us all the good stuff. And then, thankfully, lots of people tune into us. Hour and a half later, 9 o'clock on the East Coast. Thank goodness, daylight saving gone. Can I say it all at once? 9 o'clock. And we start to pull it all apart. We start to tell you the truth. Same as we're the only people who told you, remember last year, about the 10 million people who ended up getting a tax rise. Why am I starting with all of this on a Sunday night? No, I have not lost my mind. But specifically, I want to focus in on one minister who's playing this game, like they always do, in the lead up to a budget. This one is the frequent free flyer that is Richard Marles, the man who, of course, desperately needs, because of national security, to be dropped off closer to his house in a VIP jet than in Melbourne, where he'd have to sit in the back of a limousine for longer than he deserves. Well, he gave a speech while we were on the air towards the end of last week. We didn't find out about it until we were off the air last week. And he says that there are hard decisions that are needed inside the federal budget. Now, this in part is what he has to say about why it's so difficult, what his job is, and how he's just got nothing but sort of, stinky sandwiches to choose from. No good news, all bad news, but that's the responsibility placed upon a great and grand historic figure like himself.
Whilst there are difficult decisions that you need to digest, at least there is a sense that what's happening is fair income and real.
Okay. Now, I get it. In any portfolio, there are tough decisions. Do we fund this? Do we not fund that? Do we increase taxes? Never, nobody does. Or what are we going to do to pay for it? But let's actually talk about tough decisions and a federal budget, as opposed to the theatre that we get for the many weeks and months where the government is basically just trying to get us all to pay attention to their big announcements about what they're planning to do for the next 12 months, but there's often big holes in all of it. Let's actually have a real conversation about tough decisions when it comes to the federal budget. Now, if Richard Marles is making tough decisions about what they do and don't fund, it's for 6% of the federal budget. Because according to the federal budget from last year, the single biggest area of expense was welfare at 36 and a bit %. There are no plans for tough decisions about that. In health at 15.6, education 7.1, general services we're at 4.3, other is at 19, but still I don't know what that means. All other functions, so there's multiple ways they sort of hide the rest of the budget. But in terms of single ideas, defence 6%, Social security and welfare, 36%. So if we had this scenario where the Defence Minister, oh, geez, I've got all these tough decisions to make because I've got to save some money, you want to actually have a tough decision? Let's have a conversation about the money that people get from government. It's the largest percentage and real dollar than it has ever been. And they'll try and tell you that it's all to do with population, but our population does not grow by the size of the welfare budget. And they will say that's because of an ageing population. Well, guess what? When you actually are able to break down where your welfare dollar goes, it may surprise you about just how much and what the percentages are. Now, the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, which is part of the federal government, worked out that the age pension in 2021-22, so I don't have numbers for 22-23 or 23-24, but this is the last numbers that we have, 41% of the 36% of the entire federal budget that is Social Security is for the age pension. But $18 billion of it is for the disability support pension, which is higher than the family tax benefit, which only ever works in your financial favour as a government when you're in a surplus, because as soon as you are in a deficit, all this stuff is baked into spending that you can't possibly get rid of. That's at $15.7 billion. Then there's the dole at basically $15 billion, and then there's the carer payments as well at about 7%. Where would you cut? What would you cut? How would you cut? Now, because of the politics, you try to move $1 out of the single biggest part of our federal budget, they'll be all hell to pay. And for obvious reasons. If you're reliant on the $1 that somebody would either try to save or change, well, then it's a change to your life during a cost of living crisis. But when the government is as addicted to spending and as addicted to inventing new welfare payments, the biggest section of the budget suffers. So don't believe any politician when they're trying to say that there's a series of tough decisions they're making in the budget, unless they're making any tough decisions in what is the single biggest section of the budget. They are tinkering around the edges. Now, unbelievably, 500,000 extra people are now on the welfare queues in the past couple of years, because according to the Centre for Independent Studies, the IPA, they've been able to work that out, that extra people are being added to the welfare bill each and every year. And Australia does not have enough money coming in to cover the money going out. Because you see, this is the intergenerational report. This was produced by Treasury as an insight into where the country's finances were for the next 40 years. Now, you can see everything that's inside that red rectangle. Well, it is south of a surplus. Now, they probably will get one this year. Again, a little bit of a hangover from what they got last year. But in terms of structural, what is built in as the way our federal budget works, is that for a generation, longer than a generation, there's all of those deficits which will be added to all of the previous deficits, which move us towards $1.4 trillion in debt. Now, this government likes to pretend that it was all about the previous government, when, of course, we all know that, yes, the previous government, on their watch, they racked up the best part of $1 trillion. Why? Because of the COVID payments. The COVID payments that this current government, when it was in opposition, said were too stingy, that weren't generous enough. These were the people who said that we should buy an airline when Virgin got into trouble. These were the people who wanted JobKeeper to sort of keep going forever. And all of it, of course, ended up being borrowed money. So we have a problem with our politics, which is that I don't want to sit here and be the mean-hearted guy saying, well, that's it, no more money for anyone who needs it, because I'm also the guy who has sat here and forensically told you about what, not just yourself, but what other people have been going through when it comes to cost of living. But when the budget is built on not enough money coming in, but guaranteed money going out, and that's the problem for the next 40 years, then you have to do one of two things. You have to increase the sources of revenue, which means taxation, And all of us will have our problems with that. Or you have to cut spending, which means in case of the biggest section of the budget, some people currently getting money would get less. And that creates losers. So if you have a scenario where we currently suggest that you can't take $1 off what's going out and you can't raise $1 on what is needed to go in, then it just goes on the credit card. Year after year after year after year after year. But then we all play this theatre. Oh, tough decisions are being made in the budget right now. No tough decisions are being made. If it doesn't create any loser, then it's not a tough decision. It's basically moving $1 that you were spending here to $1 that you're going to spend there. Remember the scenario about the too little, too late tax cuts. It was the same amount of money, it just was moved around. So we have this conversation, we have this theatre that we're going to play all the time. I'm done with it. I want you to come on the journey with me in the lead up to this budget about not falling for the budget speculation. We'll talk about what's going on. I'll tell you when they're trying to load something up. But as always, we'll keep our eye on the ball about what they should be committed to, what they should be focused on, and what, of course, they are completely disinterested in, which is tough, real decisions. All of that garbage is just politics. Now, when it comes to cost of living, there is two pieces of information that I spent the time having a look at this weekend. One, it's serious, but it's not as serious, but it was interesting to see. You know how we often sort of quote the Finder organisation? Now, yes, they pump press releases out so that you end up saying their organisation's name on television, but it's interesting. They go off and they survey a whole collection of people and they come back with answers, particularly on things like cost of living. Now, I just wanted to mention here that there are some people that are watching us right now who are often sort of forgotten in the world of money. There's a lot of conversation in and around scamming, and a lot of people have sympathy towards scamming, but then there's a whole collection of people that have been ripped off financially by somebody who they loved at one point in time. And this Finder survey is the first time that I've actually seen anyone talking about that. Because, yeah, it's a little bit icky, but you probably know someone, or if it's you personally, somebody who's gone through this stuff. And the suggestion is that for a big bunch of people, being ripped off financially hurts deeper emotionally than, say, being cheated on in terms of intimacy. Financial infidelity refers to lying to a partner about money, from secret debt and pay cuts at work to gambling losses. In a survey of over 1,000 people, 21% said that this kind of breach constituted a greater betrayal than adultery. 22% of women feel that way, 20% of blokes feel that way, and apparently baby boomers are the ones most likely to have felt this, about toxic money secrets, with 23% ranking it as worse than an affair. Now, again, I hope you haven't been through this, but there's even money chance that someone somewhere has had a big lie told to them about money. And in a particular number of people, it's for the people who you, at the time, loved the most. I just wanted to say that we saw you, and it was interesting to see that today. The other one is to actually go behind the scenes a little bit as to why cost of living is not just a political issue, it's not just something that we talk about on the show, but it has very real effects, not even side effects, but very real effects on normal people. Now, there was a piece in The Conversation today, which is a collection of things that are written for the universities, or sometimes it pops up in the ABC, but it basically puts some things into some clear context here. Think about that when we're talking about all of the people pretending they're doing something about cost of living. We know they're not. When 36% increase in the past 12 months on petrol, hence why I always talk about how the need for the government to cut petrol taxes, but of course they choose not to. 19% up when it comes to electricity. Think of how many column inches there are, and quite correctly, devoted to the price of electricity. Well, what about the price of petrol? And the government is in a position to cut its taxes. When it came to government, it was 23 cents. Now it's 49 cents, highest it's ever been. An increase in housing, an increase in rents. This is all in the past couple of years. An increase in medicines that you need, an increase in your medical and your hospital, an increase in alcohol and tobacco, because goodness me, some people choose to spend that on their weekend. People who decide to go out, or people who just want fruit and vegetables. All of it has cost more money over the past couple of years. But that's a good way of having a look at what the numbers are. But then there is a deeper level. And on a Sunday night, what I love most about the Sunday night programs is that not only we have the first crack at all of the stuff that I think is going to be the politics of the week, we get to have an adult conversation about some of the bigger issues that are driving some of the politics and some of the news. And somebody put this together for the conversation, which was a bit of a map about what the consequences are of cost of living. Now, I know it's a larger chart, so I'm going to leave it on the screen for a couple of minutes, how you're going to be able to put it all together. Now, obviously, let's just sort of go from the top down. So high inflation and low wage growth, it introduces the second line, which is the cost of living pressures. Now, they can come up in multiple ways. Material hardship, again, the middle line, we're reading from left to right, which is things like not having enough money for food, not being able to pay for your energy bill, putting off your health care, or even being worried about where you live. In the middle of the document are the psychological effects of financial stress, strain on relationships, and, frankly, pressure on your brain, pressure on what you're thinking about. As a result of the higher inflation, the lower wage growth, the cost of living pressures, you could also have to work longer. And if you work longer, it's less time at home. And if you've got little kids, that's a difficult situation. Now, on top of that, lower productivity, we're now getting to the fourth row here, lower productivity and earnings. That can then also get into health, where we're talking about mental health, physical health, and your health behaviours as well. And in the bottom right-hand corner, the consequences that exist for your kids. Now, it ain't the sexiest thing in the world to show you a flowchart of emotional difficulty, but that one image really does explain everything about why cost of living is such a significant issue. Where everything from your relationship with your children, grandchildren, partner, the stress if you live by yourself about what you can eat, whether you can go to the doctor, or whether, of course, you'll be able to keep a roof over your head. So that's why I have no faith in this government when it turns around and says we're doing everything we possibly can when it comes to cost of living. No, they came up with too little too late tax cuts, which helped change some of the politics for them immediately, but it didn't actually change anyone's life who are in the groups that we've been talking about that you don't normally hear about on television. Now, I want to, again, just delve in a little more to the article here because I do find this particularly fascinating, right? Which is that one of the consequences of cost of living is that things like you don't have enough food, which means you're not healthy enough. You're stressed, you're overworked. The real life pressures of cost of living. And I know people will say, well, yeah, okay, this is all rather obvious, but no, sometimes you have to spell it out because we all have an assumption about what the issue means and what the complications are on top of it. But that flowchart really does tell you about what some of the potential issues are and about why, in my view, I'm motivated to talk about it as frequently as we do, as why we are as invested in the issue as we are. Not just because it's something that obviously puts this government in a bad light, but it actually reveals whether they're truly interested in taking care of people. And if you're, say, a Prime Minister who, as we know, has got a dog called Toto, but before that, of course, it was about Housing Commission. You would think that he would be pulling every possible lever he can to take care, but no, he's not. Instead, the difficult decisions are being made by the ministers around the edges of defence. Now, remember, I'm not talking about this government coming up with a new $1,000 payment. It's just everything they can to stop making life worse is what they're supposed to be doing. They make the decision to increase the tax on alcohol. They make the decision to increase the tax on petrol. They make the decision to keep things connected to indexation. So again, forgive me if I don't believe them when they say they're doing everything they possibly can and they're making really tough choices. Boats are back in the news, and we all knew that this would be the case. Now, the Labor Party will tell you, because it's not 50,000 people turning up or 1,000 people dying on the side of the ocean, as of course was previously the case, there's nothing to see here. Well, it's pretty obvious that there is something to see here. Remember, not the people who turned up this weekend, but the ones who turned up a few weeks ago. These ones, again, off Western Australia. Well, that took the Prime Minister by a little bit of shock because, you see, his mobile phone didn't work in the car.
I've been travelling in the car, so I'm not. I haven't been advised about that. But our policies are very, very clear. Our policies are clear, which is that boats that arrive in that fashion, we have policies in place to ensure that they're dealt with.
I've been in the car. I'll never forget that one. Would you imagine what the lefty media would do with a Liberal minister who had something to say like that? Sorry, I didn't get it because I wasn't in the car. Like the jokes and the memes and the T-shirts and the tea towels they'd be selling at the Labor Party conference. But no, this is our boat. Didn't happen, remember? Just memory hole it. Pretend it doesn't exist. Come on. Well, of course, the latest group was 14 people who arrived off Western Australia. These people come from China. Now, isn't it interesting that people would be claiming asylum in Australia from China? Total number of Australians who go to China to claim refugee status from Australia, 0. But, of course, people trying to escape from China. Now, if they're not refugees, and it'll be fun to follow whether this is the case or not, then what are they doing here? Why would Chinese people end up as the people that were trying to make it to Australia? All of this, of course, fascinating because, as we also learned today, one of these people went missing. They ended up being found. But again, question mark. We've seen in the United States that there have been Chinese nationals that have been crossing the border from Mexico into the United States. Why? The landmass is not within walking distance. And why is that, again, the scenario here when it comes to people apparently coming from China and all of the distance and all of the islands and all of the other countries, but the place they were trying to get to was here. And for what purpose? Well, we'll all find out together. But of course, the Prime Minister says nothing to see here, nothing to do with our changes when it comes to policy. As for the Liberal Party, they get a free kick from right in front.
People smugglers will always try to change their methods in order to ply what is a dangerous trade. But there is no change to Operation Sovereign Borders. It's important that that message be sent, and once again, through the response of the Australian government, that message will be sent very clearly again to the region.
See, here's a slippery one here, right? There's been no changes to Operation Sovereign Borders, and that message is the one that should get out, which means the next point I'm going to make is one that's going to annoy the government because they're going to say that I'm sending a secret message to the people wanting to jump in a boat in China and make its way towards Australia or from where anyone else wants to come and become an illegal boat person here. Operation Sovereign Borders is not the same policy that was put in place by the great, late, wonderful Jim Molan with Scott Morrison and Tony Abbott as the politicians in charge. You see, that had 3 parts to it. It was offshore processing, boat turnbacks, and a thing called a temporary protection visa. It meant that if for whatever reason you ended up in the Australian community, the second you did something wrong, you would be able to be booted out of the country for that reason. But instead, this government, it'll tell you that it'll turn around a boat, but geez, a few have been getting through recently. If these are the ones that are getting through, they want to tell us how many they've turned around and stopped? Oh, of course not. Operational reasons. They want to talk about offshore processing. OK, but then their own Home Affairs Minister in Claire O'Neill has tried to scandalise the process about how all of those places have been set up and how they continue to exist, which leaves us with the third leg of the tripod. This government got rid of temporary protection visas. Andrew Giles, as the Immigration Minister, got together with the Prime Minister. It was promised before the election, but it came to reality afterwards, which meant of the 50,000 people who came here in boats under the previous Labor government, of the 20,000 that were still amongst us on the temporary protection visa, They were in intentionally illegal limbo. Automatically, bang, permanent citizens. Geez, I wonder who they'll get a thank you note from when it comes time to vote. So this bloke wants to, again, turn around and tell you, oh, it's exactly the same as the previous government. Rubbish, garbage, BS. Instead, we have a scenario where, yes, they'll try and turn you around. But if you make it to offshore processing, there'll be a whole bunch of lawyers and lefty members of parliament from the Greens to the Teals that'll be arguing for medical emergencies and every other BS reason to take them out, to bring them in to Australia. But because there's no temporary protection visa anymore, basically you stay. Oh, but they're getting serious about a potential new law, which is that if you don't go back to the place that you're supposed to come from because you're not a refugee, they'll send you to jail for 1 year. Does anyone believe that Andrew Giles or clueless Claire O'Neill have got the stones at the end of that 12 months in jail to keep sending someone back? Of course not. So whether it is a long period of time or a short period of time, the message sent by this government is that if you wait out the system for long enough, you'll get to permanent residency. That's why they're jumping back in the boats. But apparently, if you talk about that at all, you're sending the people smugglers a message, and they blame the messenger, not the message, which is the lies of this government. Now, another perfect example I want to get to here of the Canberra bubble, just the most Canberra-y story you could possibly think of, right? Now, in February, the Australian newspaper broke the story that a whole bunch of people who were trying to win government contracts, all of their information ended up getting leaked by the Department of Finance, symbolised here by their minister and mean girl, Katie Gallagher. Katie Gallagher's finance department is scrambling to reassure 400 service providers the government can manage sensitive data after the bureaucrats accidentally leaked confidential contract and personal supply details of 236 suppliers competing for government work. At the time, Jane Hume, unimpressed, she had to say, because of the minister's lack of interest in her job, the jobs of others have been put at risk. So much for a finance minister who's focused on the job at hand and reducing the Commonwealth's legal bill. Well, a few weeks later, the reason to tell you about this tonight on a Sunday is that apparently even more offensive than the personal information of people that were trying to run Australian businesses, winning government contracts or getting jobs from the government was this story. Now, according to the Australian newspaper, Indigenous colour coding of some of the spreadsheets that were apparently connected to the link is now the bigger scandal than whether or not there was a link. Let me explain. Finance Department officials will undertake cultural and diversity awareness training after an Indigenous contractor complained to Katie Gallagher that the Aboriginal suppliers were identified by dark colours in an accidentally leaked spreadsheet. Yeah, that was the problem. Not the data, but the colour in which the spreadsheet had. The independent review, which had been led by the Commonwealth and ACT Ombudsman, Michael Manthorpe, said that the complaint, quote, noted that Indigenous suppliers had been identified by colouring the cells in a particular orange or brown colour. It has taken steps to change how Indigenous suppliers are identified for legitimate purposes related to the Indigenous procurement policy. Here we go. Procurement Division has advised the review that it will ask its relevant staff to undertake culture and diversity awareness training. And indeed, a cultural briefing had recently been conducted. So the bigger problem was not that the data had been leaked by anyone. It was what colour certain businesses were being described on spreadsheets. Just mega stuff, right? Peak Canberra. Oh, yeah, and finally, massive weekend at the Turnbull Times. Big weekend over there at The Guardian. They, of course, had right in the middle of their website, in between all of the, begging for donations, my partner ogles other women, and it makes me feel unattractive. It's not a petty problem, says Philippa, because your feelings matter. And then there was this little one here where the polls show that Trump is winning in the swing states, and clearly that's a failure of the press because, they cover him at all because they're so fair whenever they talk about Trump on TV, aren't they?
realise what's coming down the track, which is fascism with a capital F.
This is what fascists do. Fascists lie so much.
Fire hose of
and
falsehoods.
They always say it. Russia's fire hose of falsehoods, just like fascists. They lie so much that soon people get exhausted.
Why it sounds like an appeal to white supremacists, because in many cases it is an appeal to white supremacists. That's next.
This is fascist rhetoric.
The dehumanizing language that he is increasingly willing to use, poisoning the blood of the country, I should note, also has echoes of fascists.
Yeah, it's the media. What about the fact that just people are being polled, they know what's going on, they think so much of it's garbage, whether that's true, fair or not? We've shown you the data here about why I think these polls are going to change, particularly on the issue in and around abortion, but I don't think the media is the problem here. Look forward to now being mentioned by the Turnbull Times every week for the next 30 weeks, because I dared point out what passed for content for them this weekend. Quick break, back with more here on Paul Murray Live. Thank you very much for watching wherever you happen to be, and I can tell you what, we are all over the country tonight. Here in the Man Cave in Perth right now is, of course, none other than the wonderful Christy McSweeney. Lovely to see you. James Ashby, who's very happy that we didn't flash to him 30 seconds ago. Of course, running for One Nation in the seat of Keppel. In the meantime, making the most of things in Yeppoon. And the wonderful Nicolle Flint, who's in Adelaide, who, the whispers keep building. She's on her way back, baby! Lovely to see you, Nicolle. Lovely to see you. And, well, fingers crossed that something happens sooner rather than later and you're back in the fight and on your way back through Boothby. All right, I appreciate all of you.
Did you actually want to comment on that, Paul?
Yeah, I just was being cute and I was seeing if anyone was going to jump forward. But no, fair enough. Play it coy. I understand. All right, I'm still slightly distracted by James, who I'm pretty sure is either wearing board shorts or, we've known a lot about him in the past couple of seconds. All right, now, let's get to the supposed hard decisions. Well, I've got a pair of bonds that look the same, that's all. Now, let's get to the hard decisions which supposedly being made inside the budget. But as I pointed out before, Christy, the hard decision is that Australia needs to find more revenue to match its spending, or it needs to cut its spending. Either way, it creates a political firestorm. I would have used another term at another time, but we all know what that would smell like, right? 36.6% is welfare, right? Compared to 6% that is the defence budget, and so on, as we've seen before here. So I just say all this because we're about to go through this theatre for the next few weeks about all the tough decisions they're making in the budget. Well, unless they're actually dealing with the structural problem of the budget that has us in deficit for the next 40 years, it's all just noise.
Well, here's another hard decision for the Department of Defence, and this is little known, but last year the Senate Foreign Affairs and Defence and Trade Legislative Committee launched an inquiry, and that was an inquiry into the Defence Department's capability to support Australia's defence program. Now, that report of that inquiry was supposed to be released the last sitting day, 28th of March last week. It's been extended to the 24th of November. Surprise, surprise. We know that there's been tensions between the Defence Minister and the top brass of the Defence Force. They don't need this report coming out, which the government assumedly would shape to say the Defence Department can't support the capability to provide an evidence base for cutting further spending in defence, so they don't have to cut welfare spending and so they don't have to stop promising people things that really are doing nothing to lift productivity and efficiency of the economy.
Yeah, it's this thing, Nicolle, where, again, because we have created, put frankly, we've created a scenario where wherever government draws a line, there is somebody who is the victim or the loser on the other side of the line, automatically seized upon by an opposition and amplified by media, which means you don't end up doing anything, yet we play this nonsense where we're going to pretend that, we're making tough decisions right now. They're not doing them at all. They're just working out how to spending kind of last year's money in kind of a different way.
Absolutely, Paul. And look, the scale of spending by the Albanese Labor government is just extraordinary. I mean, what was it? The $1 billion to build solar panels here last week that they had to fly up on their private jets to to the Hunter Valley, I think it was, to make the announcement. The colossal spending on renewables, on the transmission lines, you know, NDIS, look, everywhere you look, Labor is spending money. So I will be most interested to see where they think they are actually going to save some money. And Christy was just picking up on the cuts that Richard Marles seems to be laying the groundwork for in defence. Across the board, this Albanese Labor government is looking more and more like the terrible, failed Rudd-Gillard-Rudd governments, and defence is yet another area. Because in the last year of the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd disaster, they cut $1.9 billion from defence, and they got defence spending overall to the lowest level since 1938. So, you know, you cannot trust Labor on national security. We've had another boat arrive as well, Paul. So more and more, to my mind, this is looking like a repeat of Rudd-Gillard-Rudd, and we know what a disastrous mess that ended up being.
Well, absolutely. And again, you know, the government turns around and want to pretend that, Operation Sovereign Borders is exactly the same as it always was. You've knocked a third of the tripod over, which means the whole thing falls over. Surprised that we are where we are. But James, again, you know, as somebody who's sort of sat to the side of the major parties and seen how all of this game works, right? When I talk about a federal budget that's got 36% of it connected to welfare, and if we can flash up the numbers associated with that, yes, the biggest section of that is the aged care. I think the family tax benefit one is sort of the biggest area of questionable spending, because this was a handout that was given by the Howard government when we were particularly full of surpluses. The second you start to go into deficit, that's sort of baked in handout that isn't something related to your conditions, otherwise, you know, unemployment or being a carer, then you start to fall away pretty quickly. But no one's going to touch this stuff, which means we just end up, you know, supposedly $1 trillion of debt was terrible. Well, we're on our way to 1.5.
Well, the priorities are wrong, and that comes from both major parties. I remember when the coalition were in, we were talking about the high number of long-term unemployed people, and the reality came down to the very simple fact a lot of these people are just simply unemployable. They've got very low education standards, just don't want to work, and therefore they've been so unemployable for such a long period of time, no one wants to look at them. And we are getting our priorities wrong. We should be looking at defence as a #1 priority for this country. It's pretty clear our borders are very porous right now under a Labor government. But, you know, the other problem we've got, when you're trying to get people to join defence, morale is at an all-time low. We couldn't even protect one of our greatest, strongest war heroes in Ben Roberts-Smith only a couple of years ago. And then, you know, you have a look at the Veterans Affairs Department where people are lined up, queued at politicians' offices, just trying to get some satisfaction out of the department. You're not laying a very good base for people to want to sign up and defend this country. And now we've got over 50% of our people that were not born here. So they don't feel obliged to defend it either. So we've got some real major problems, but priorities are all up the wazoo. And we've got to get away from this renewable stuff and go back to the real basics.
Now, the one big piece of legislation that not a lot of people are allowed to talk about publicly is a thing called Nature Positive. Now, remember when Pauline Hanson was standing up in the Senate, she was turning around and she was talking about how people sign these NDAs, they go in to have a look at what some of the detail of the system is, but they're not allowed to take photos, and they're not even allowed to, once they leave the room, go and tell the people that they're working for what the plan is. That's the process, but the actual plan in part has things like an EPA, an Environmental Protection Agency being permanently established in Australia. Now, that, of course, would turn around and, well, be rather aggressive about things like tree clearing. Now, of course, all of these things sound horrific and terrible when you're saying things like tree clearing, but if I told you that there might be very significant financial penalties if you cut down the already dead stuff on your farm, on your property, not go out in the middle of a national park and just start blowing stuff up. We're talking about dealing with stuff that's already on your property. Now, we, of course, Christy saw in Western Australia the Aboriginal heritage legislation, which was put together by the West Australian government. As soon as it got in the hands of people to be able to exploit it, it exploded about what the claims were and about what the consequences were, so much so they had to get rid of the legislation. So if Western Australia, who were the authors of that garbage, are telling us that this is a mega version of that garbage, I'm hearing a little alarm bell going off. What do you think of nature positive?
Nature Positive is this wonderful spin name that the government has given to something they've drafted 2 years ago now, which is meant to replace what's called the EPBC Act, which is a terrible alphabet soup of political jargon, which means Environmental Protection, Biodiversity and Conservation Act. And it has got things in it now that are going to be really, really risky for farmers who engage in responsible land clearing, for property owners, and also really difficult for the mining industry. And this is why the West Australian government has come out. Despite being a Labor government, they know that the voting public in Western Australia are on the side of mining because they're on the side of getting paid and they're on the side of keeping Western Australia's GST at the rate that it is, because mining is what enables the state to contribute that to the national economy. So if Roger Cook says this is bad, believe him. But we're going to see a tussle too between the Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek and the Mining Minister Madeleine King, and that's already happened with Labor trying to move offshore gas petroleum responsibility approvals away from this new Environmental Act and the Environment Minister into the Mining Ministry, just because they know they need to keep mining the way it is and not have it interfered with.
Well, and it all links back to our first conversation, which is, of course, mining's all, detested by Labor MPs, most of them detested by the Greens. Yeah, all the rest of it, but they need it for all of the, the cut of the ticket that they take in order to get anywhere near a budget surplus, which then they get to turn around and say it's because we're managing the economy brilliantly. But let's talk again about, because I can understand here, James, there's so many tentacles to this that it's very difficult to talk about. None of us have got problems with environmental protections, but which of course will all be used as the reason all of this is being done. But if it's being negotiated in secret and the people negotiating can't tell the people they represent what the hell's going on, then I don't think something great's about to happen here. If you've come up with a great mousetrap, you want to tell everyone, right?
Well, the EPBC Act took 10 years to formulate, and finally it got the seal of approval by all states. Now, not all states have had a look at this new nature positive plan. I read what they've actually released online. It took me all the way from Perth back to Brisbane to actually read the numerous pages of content that is out there for the public to understand. And yes, it will impact upon new property developments. Yes, it'll have a massive impact on mining. Also to environmental tourism as well off our Great Barrier Reef. But one of the biggest things that hasn't been raised in this is it says in no uncertain terms they actually want to lock up 30% of mainland Australia and reduce our ability to use 30% of our oceans. So that is recreational and commercial fishermen. Currently about 11% of our ocean is locked down. We can't go in there. It's green zones and various other zones. They want to lock that down to 30%. They want to do it over the next couple of years. So this is really concerning. The mere fact that the minister's just not even prepared to deal with the states, let alone the public, is of great concern. You should look it up. Nature Positive Plan. Do some reading, do some homework. You'll find it astoundingly scary.
I've got to take a break, but Nicolle, I want to talk to you about this issue on the other side, because I want to talk about how Labor's really good at inventing these big pieces of bureaucracy whose roots go down as fast as they possibly can while they're in office. And then if you come into government, if you touch any of that whatsoever, then of course all of the media turns around and starts trying to defend the bureaucracy as opposed to you trying to deal or defang it. We'll get to that straight after the break here in a moment, as well as what our panel think is the bold prediction for the week ahead. About 13 minutes away from the Royal Report. And speaking of the Royals, there's this new movie called Scoop. It's about Prince Andrew, and I'll give you a 2-word review later. More in a second. Here with the wonderful Nicolle Flint, the equally delightful James Ashby, and the, well, Double or nothing. Delightful Christy McSweeney. I thought that'd just be the best way to weirdly introduce people. You know, that's my thing. Now, Nicolle, quickly before we go, just 30 seconds, because I didn't give you the chance to be part of the previous discussion, right? So Labor's getting ready for this new sort of, mega approach when it comes to environmentalism and all of the different fights within it. Is this not one of the great challenges of Conservatives, is that once they actually get to power, you are fighting against an institution that has been completely built outside of politics as well, that if you even make any moves on, then somehow, you're trying to send us back to the 1950s or such, the ABC will say?
Well, precisely, and that's a big part of the problem, that the left-wing media, of which is, 95% of the Australian media, unfortunately, will fully support any of these big bureaucracies. Paul, what worries me most about this, though, it's just the extraordinary level of regulation that is being imposed on businesses in every single way. And so this will be sort of a super environmental department and initiative. You've got the workplace relations changes, which have sent us back, 20, 30 years, cost of living pressures on business. It's just never ending. So this is just yet another, ultimately, compliance burden on businesses that will make it harder for people to employ and to get on with earning income for the nation.
Bold predictions in a second, but Nicolle, you've written at skynews.com.au about the belief that women are going to start to turn on Albo. We'll see it sooner rather than later. It's the Labor Party that has its women problem, not the other way around.
Well, that's what the polls, so a couple of news polls, December and March, have shown that Labor is actually the party that has an issue with women, despite, again, what the left-wing media like to say. And, Paul, if you look back over electoral history, the Liberal Party is no less popular with women than Labor is. We're sort of, it's fairly similar, despite all of the narrative that, women are more progressive and women like the Labor Party. And, of course, they like the Labor Party because Labor have quotas for women and so they have more women in Parliament. It is so demeaning to women to make those claims because, at the end of the day, women will vote for the policies that best suit them and best suit their families. And right now, women in particular are feeling it on cost of living pressures. So I really think that this is going to be a tough election for the Labor Party. And ultimately, women aren't stupid. They will vote for the party that is going to best deliver for them, not the party who may have more women or whatever group you want to apply. They will look at the policies and vote on that basis.
Yeah, well, even the Turnbull Times poll, the Essential poll, which pops up in The Guardian, says the Liberal Party leading by 3 points with women at the moment in primary vote. But shh, don't tell anyone. Narratives must be spent and spinning. James, a bold prediction. What's definitely happening this week? What is legally binding to absolutely happen this week?
Well, I suspect we're going to see the judgment in that Bruce Lerman case, but no one will be left unscathed. I think Justice Lee is going to give everyone a touch-up on this.
Yeah, Chrissy?
The High Court hearing on the Iranian gentleman is due on the 17th of April. We're going to find out what effect that has on Labor having to recall Parliament, re-deal with this immigration schmozzle that they have continued to run into the ground since last year.
And Nicolle Flint, your bold prediction for the week ahead, please.
It may be a very interesting week in South Australian Liberal Party politics.
Well, what could this mean? What will it
Simon
mean?
Birmingham's gone.
We'll all... No, way better than that. We're going to get... we'll all watch this space and we'll all remain as cheering as possible. Thank you very much, ladies and gent. I do appreciate it. We'll talk to you again very soon. All right, quick break. Back with more here on Paul Murray Live, about 5 minutes away from the Royal Report. Yeah, that movie scoop. Now, on the weekend, I watched this new movie, which is all about the behind-the-scenes story of the BBC interview with Prince Andrew.
If I do an interview, the question is, why you?
With respect, you know how people see you.
Spell it out.
Brandy, Andy.
With respect.
It sucks. Who cares? Right? Like, I work in this business and I'm fascinated by that part of it, but if you don't, the interview, Why did he do it? I still don't know, and I still don't know as a result of the movie. Here's the Royal Report.